There is a long history of amateurs who are passionate about climbing. For example, the late Disney president Frank Wells, and then doctors, lawyers, and financiers. In the mid-90s, the 40-year-old Sandy Pittman, bored with life as the socialite wife of MTV creator Bob Pittman, transformed enthusiasm for mountaineering and adventuring into an obsession. Her fixation had cost her hundreds of thousands of dollars, and perhaps her marriage. Human beings were not designed to survive at 8,000 meters. Those who stay up too high, too long, will eventually be overcome by the altitude. This is the reason climbers refer to all peaks above 26,000 feet as the death zone. When Sandy Hill Pittman reached Mount Everest's summit at roughly 2:30 p.m. on May 10, 1996, she wasted no time celebrating. Pittman's reputation from her previous two Everest attempts was already well established. People are still talking about the first time she arrived in 1993. She returned to Everest the following year on an expedition sponsored for $200,000 and videotaped for NBC. This time, Pittman attempted to climb the Kangshung Face, technically the most difficult ascent. She spent thousands of dollars to hire 4 of the best climbers in the world, but in the end they were turned back because of bad weather. Pittman was so frustrated, she tore a gold cross with semi-precious stones off her neck and hurled it, much to the horror of the Sherpas, who watched what to them was a small fortune disappear. Everest was the last peak in Pittman's grand plan to become the 3rd woman in history to scale the 7 summits, the highest mountains on each continent. The experience would provide a finale to her book in progress and bring her one step closer to realizing her dream of becoming a sportswoman with media tie-ins. Pittman's team was organized by Scott Fischer, a 40-year-old professional guide based in Seattle, who co-founded the trekking company Mountain Madness. With 3 guides and 7 Sherpas, Fischer would lead 8 clients up the southeast route. Before attempting the summit, Fischer's team spent a month at base camp. Pittman was described by Mountain Madness as a competent climber. She was, in fact, a good deal more experienced than some of those in other expeditions. From the beginning, she was a large presence on the mountain. Most of the climbers at base camp had read enough to know she was the glamorous wife of a multimillionaire. But she tended to advertise her wealth, and she made no secret of the fact that she was friends with the powerful. On May 10, the anniversary of the previous record when 37 climbers reached the summit was chosen as the day for the ascent. The night before the climb, about 24 mountaineers in 3 groups, Fischer's team, a New Zealand group, and a Taiwanese group, gathered. It was a clear night. The moon was huge. The next afternoon, when Sandy Pittman hauled herself to the world's highest vantage, she jubilantly exchanged high fives with the climbers already crowding the peak. But reaching the summit is only half the journey, and most accidents happen on the way down. Pittman was already very tired. Observers from another team said she had to be short roped by a Sherpa on the way up, and she was the last client in her group to reach the summit, with Fischer following as rear guide. She didn't have time to do more than snap a few pictures. It was lucky that she got down fast. For the next 4 people, not including the Sherpas, no more than 15 minutes behind her, ran into trouble. Makalu Gao, a Taiwanese climber, was discovered half frozen the following day and was delivered from death's door in one of the highest helicopter rescues ever. Fischer and Rob Hall, the New Zealand expedition leader, who stopped to help his client Doug Hansen, were not so lucky. Pittman continued to fatigue badly on the way down. Charlotte Fox, an experienced climber, had just given her a shot, a dexamethasone, unzipping the back corner of Pittman's suit and jabbing the needle into her buttocks, right through her other clothes. An anti-inflammatory with amphetamine-like side effects, the drug is usually administered only as a last resort. But Pittman was completely exhausted. By the time the storm hit full force, a large group of climbers had descended the fixed ropes. Bedelman, Pittman, Fox, Madsen, Gamelgard, and Claire Schoening were all part of Fischer's team, There was no way to tell which direction led back up or down. Half blind and battered by the wind, the group scattered in different directions on the saddle between Lot and Everest. It was like swimming in a glass of milk, a very turbulent glass of milk, for another 8 to 10 hours. All were now out of oxygen. With the wind chill lowering temperatures to 100 degrees below freezing, the climbers were shaking uncontrollably from hypothermia. Sometime around midnight, the storm subsided. The stars came out, and the climbers decided to make a mad dash for safety. But Madsen was barely conscious, and Pittman and Fox were too weak to walk. When it was 1:30 a.m., Biedermann told Anatoly Boukreev, a burly Russian guide, that the others were in grave danger. Boukreev, 38, a world-class climber who grew up in the Ural Mountains, set out immediately. But the storm had picked up again. There was zero visibility. Meanwhile, Fox and Sandy Pittman had completely given up. By 3 a.m., they had been out for 30 hours. Tim Madsen had a better attitude. He said, "Move your legs." But after searching for 30 minutes, Boukreev saw a light. He heard Madsen yelling. Quickly, he gave Pittman oxygen, left Madsen with her, and took Fox to camp, covering the quarter mile in 40 minutes. Exhausted, he tried to find other climbers to help. Nobody would or could, so Boukreev headed back out into the storm alone. When he reached Madsen, he gave him oxygen and told him he had to stand up and walk. Pittman tried to do the same. Pittman couldn't say much. "I'm tired. I cannot." So Anatoly Boukreev half carried, half dragged Sandy Pittman back to Camp 4. That morning, Boukreev started to search for Fischer, a close friend. He found him frozen in the snow, his oxygen mask still on. No one will ever know exactly what happened, whether he was overcome by the altitude or simply wrung out from weeks of shepherding clients up and down the mountain. The survivors had spent an exhausted few hours in the tents on Camp 4 in the South Col at 26,000 feet. All were relatively unscathed. All were overwrought and extremely lethargic from the high altitude. They had to get down lower as soon as possible. They finally reached base camp on Monday, May 13. There, they heard the tragic tale of Rob Hall's farewell satellite call to his pregnant wife in New Zealand before he signed off and waited to die in a crevasse near the summit. 3 Indian climbers on the north side of the mountain had also perished. The death toll stood at 8. The following day, there was a memorial service for Fischer, and the group talked about their grief and guilt. People were torn up about the death. Earlier, they had made a pact that no one would talk to the press until they were all down from the mountain. But the next morning, when the team hiked down to Fischer, the town below base camp, it was obvious that Pittman was in a hurry to split. First thing Friday, she chartered a helicopter to Kathmandu for thousands of dollars, offering a ride to Madsen and the team doctor. For the same sum, she could have chartered a large Russian helicopter to take everyone down. In Kathmandu, Pittman headed straight for the hotel, where she fielded calls from the world press. As she sunbathed by the pool, Pittman was easily identifiable by reporters by her bandaged fingertips and the Hermes catalog on the table beside her. On Monday, May 20, Fischer's team gathered in the hotel garden for a group picture. Pittman, who had originally refused to pose for the media, arrived fully made up. The other climbers, most of them casually dressed, appeared taken aback. After the photo shoot, Pittman hosted a blowout cocktail party in honor of Fischer. Throughout the evening, there was an almost palpable tension between Pittman and some of her fellow climbers. There were those who felt she tried to keep her distance from Biedermann and Boukreev, the men who had risked their own necks to save hers. Journalist John Krakauer had no doubt that Scott Fischer died because he was exhausted from guiding amateur climbers. Rob Hall clearly died in the act of rescuing his amateur client. But Pittman maintained that there were no heroes that night, that the guys were just doing their jobs, what they were paid to do. On May 22nd, Sandy Pittman left for New York. One fellow climber suggests that even at the time of her departure, Pittman was still reeling from the shock, that she had been truly humbled by the ferocity of the mountain. Some fellow climbers said wryly, "Princess Sandy, very rich, very spoiled. It is also true that Pittman inspires much jealousy around New York. She's good-looking, climbs mountains, and pilots her own helicopter. Who can pitch in and talk to her about climbing K2 at a dinner party? No one can say that Sandy Pittman hasn't worked hard or seriously committed herself to building her prowess as a climber and sportswoman. But whoever the person in question is, rich or poor, strong or clumsy, it is always Everest that decides how it will turn out.